What happens when a 94-year-old Hollywood legend steps into an MMA cage and completely destroys a fighter without throwing a single punch? This isn't a movie scene. It happened. And the way Clint Eastwood silenced the cockiest fighter in the sport shocked millions. The MGM Grand in Las Vegas was buzzing with energy. It was the opening night of the annual World Combat Championship Expo, a sprawling three-day spectacle that drew fans, fighters, promoters, celebrities, and media outlets from around the globe. The expo had grown in recent years, blending spectacle with nostalgia, sport with showmanship. This year, in an effort to celebrate the legends of toughness, the organizers had invited none other than Clint Eastwood as a guest of honor. Though Clint hadn't starred in a movie in nearly a decade, his legacy loomed larger than life. His films, Gran Torino, Unforgiven, Dirty Harry, were more than cinema. They were American folklore carved into celluloid. Now, in '93, Clint wasn't moving like he used to, but he didn't need to. The very aura of the man was enough to silence a crowd. When he entered the arena, flanked by a quiet entourage, the sea of noise dipped into reverent applause. He wore a simple gray blazer, dark jeans, and boots that looked like they'd survived wars. His weathered face bore the creases of 1,000 sunrises, but his eyes, ice-pale and calculating, still cut through the chaos like a gunslinger scanning for threats. The hosts ushered him to the stage where a panel of retired fighters and action stars awaited him. There was buzz, excitement, and the warmth of celebration in the air. As Clint took the microphone and began to speak about the evolution of toughness, about how grit wasn't just in the fists but in the spirit, he held the audience with quiet authority. When I made those westerns, he said, voice rough as desert gravel. We didn't have CGI, no wires. You fell off a horse, you hit the dirt. You pulled a punch wrong, you took on the chin. People nodded, clapped. Being tough isn't about looking mean, he continued. It's about standing for something. It's about knowing when not to fight, and when to make damn sure it's the last thing your opponent remembers. Then, like a crack of thunder from a clear sky, a voice interrupted. Save it for the retirement home, old man. The voice boomed through the arena, causing heads to turn and murmurs to ripple. Standing near the edge of the press section, dressed in a sleeveless hoodie and shadowboxing like he couldn't sit still, was Rocco the Ripper Donovan, 28, undefeated, and notorious for his loudmouth antics and viral interviews. Rocco was a rising star in the MMA world. Built like a statue with a face made for pay-per-view posters, he was known less for humility and more for highlight reel knockouts followed by obnoxious mic drops. Clint paused, his hand resting on the podium, and looked down at the young man. The crowd hesitated, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. Rocco grinned, taking the silence as an invitation. You talking about toughness? He barked. You wouldn't last 30 seconds in a real cage. A few cameras swung in his direction. Some fans cheered nervously, unsure if this was staged. You're out here preaching like some Wild West preacher, but let's be honest. Those movies? That's fantasy. Real toughness is bleeding on canvas. Real toughness is when the only way you leave is on your feet or on a stretcher. Clint said nothing. He simply stared. Rocco continued, emboldened by the attention. What's next? You gonna teach us how to squint and talk slow? He said, giving his best Eastwood impression. Maybe show us how to point a fake gun and whisper something about feeling lucky? The crowd groaned a little now. Some laughed, others looked uncomfortable. Clint slowly lifted the microphone again. You think toughness is just about hitting people? He asked, voice low, calm, like the first note of a thunderstorm. You think it's only about muscle, about knocking someone down? Rocco crossed his arms and nodded, smiling smugly. Clint leaned forward, eyes fixed on the younger man. You don't know a damn thing about toughness, he said. Not yet. The crowd erupted. Rocco's smile faltered. Oh yeah, he called out. How about you come down here and show me? The moderator stepped in, trying to diffuse the moment with awkward laughter, but no one was listening. Clint straightened, then stepped away from the podium. He slowly made his way to the edge of the stage and gestured toward Rocco. You want a show? Clint said, his voice carrying despite its softness. How about this, tomorrow, 3 minutes? Exhibition mat. Just you, me, and no cameras except the ones brave enough to watch you learn something the hard way. The crowd lost it. Phones were out. Tweets were firing. Rocco held his arms wide and shouted, "You're on. Just don't break a hip walking in." But the jeers were starting to backfire. The crowd wasn't sure anymore. Clint didn't blink, didn't smile. He simply turned, walked back to the podium, and said, "Make sure he signs a waiver. I don't want his mom suing me after." Reporters scrambled to rewrite their headlines. What was supposed to be a respectful tribute to an aging icon had just turned into the most anticipated showdown of the expo. Nobody believed it was a real fight. Surely Clint wouldn't risk his health, his life, for a public stunt. But the tone in his voice wasn't scripted. It wasn't Hollywood. It was the kind of stillness before a storm. That night, every sports blog and fight podcast in the country lit up. Speculation ran wild. Was it a performance? Would there be contact? Was Clint even serious? But deep down, people didn't care. They just wanted to see what would happen. Because whatever Clint Eastwood had in mind, it wasn't going to be predictable. And maybe, just maybe, the cocky young fighter was about to learn that mocking a man who made a living playing killers, gunslingers, and soldiers was not the smartest move. The night had arrived. Every seat in the arena was filled hours before the main event, and the buzz in the air was unlike anything anyone had experienced in the history of mixed martial arts. It wasn't just another fight. It wasn't even about violence anymore. This was something different. A cultural collision between two generations, between brute strength and timeless grit, between loudmouth bravado and old-school silence. At the center of it all stood Clint Eastwood and Travis, the Vulture Maddox. Or at least, that's what the world thought. Maddox entered the cage first, draped in his signature black and silver robe, an entourage of hype men and security following behind. The lights pulsed with bass-heavy music, and Travis played it up, flexing, shouting, blowing kisses to the booing fans, and giving exaggerated bows to the ones still cheering. He held up a custom mouthguard that read "Grandpa Killer" on the front and did his usual throat-slit gesture to the camera. He was ready for war. But then, something unusual happened. The lights didn't change. There was no dramatic walkout music, no roaring guitar riffs or cinematic explosions. Instead, the arena darkened completely. A single spotlight lit the entrance ramp. Silence fell. Then came a slow, deliberate clack, one step at a time. The unmistakable sound of boots on hardwood echoed in the dome, rhythmically deliberate. And out walked Clint Eastwood. Not in fight gear, not in a robe, but in a worn-out Western duster coat and a simple gray t-shirt underneath. His weathered face was unreadable. His eyes locked straight ahead. In his right hand, a chair, just a plain wooden chair. No gloves, no trainers, no smile. The audience didn't cheer at first. They didn't even know how to react. Clint walked up to the cage, set the chair down just outside it, sat crossed one leg over the other, and stared at Maddox. He didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't move. For a long moment, it was as if time itself had been arrested. Maddox tilted his head, confused. "What is this?" he laughed, trying to mask the creeping discomfort. "You gonna knit me a scarf, old man?" Eastwood didn't answer. He just stared, calm, unshaken. The referee looked toward the UFC officials. The crowd began to murmur. Was this some kind of message? Was Eastwood refusing to fight? Then the Jumbotron above the ring came to life. Black and white footage of Eastwood. Real, gritty clips from decades ago. Him boxing on the set of $1 Million Baby, sparring with actual fighters, training alone at 5 a.m. in some dusty California gym. A deep, gravelly voiceover played above the images. Not Eastwood's voice, but a narrator. A man doesn't need fists to make a point. He doesn't need youth to be dangerous. He only needs presence. And silence. The audience erupted. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was theater. This was a chess game. Maddox paced inside the cage, agitated now. "Is this supposed to scare me?" he shouted toward Clint. "You're nothing but a movie prop." Clint slowly rose from the chair. Still no gloves. Still no intention of stepping inside the cage. But he walked toward the cage door and motioned to have it opened. The referee hesitated, then complied. Clint stepped in. No security. No hesitation. Maddox, still bouncing on his heels, grinned wide. You really gonna do this? Fine, I'll end this farce. But as he moved forward to square up, Clint raised his hand. Not in defense, in a subtle gesture, as if stopping a child from speaking out of turn. And then, calmly, he said, You don't need to be hit to feel pain. Maddox blinked. What? Eastwood pointed to the big screen again. It flickered to footage of Maddox, not in fights but behind the scenes. Clips pulled from obscure YouTube interviews, training bloopers, post-fight breakdowns where his arrogance slipped into insecurity. One showed Maddox crying after a hard loss early in his career. Another featured him ranting about not feeling good enough when his father refused to attend his first professional match. The crowd fell quiet again. This was no longer an Eastwood highlight reel. This was a mirror being held up to Maddox's soul. And Clint still hadn't raised a fist. You think strength is shouting, he said, voice low but audible through the speakers. But real strength is being seen at your weakest and standing anyway. Maddox froze. The crowd began to murmur, not with excitement, but with awe. A new chant rose from the stands. Clint, Clint, Clint. Maddox, red-faced and furious now, charged across the cage. And in the blink of an eye, Clint sidestepped him with precision only age and wisdom could offer. One hand on Maddox's shoulder, the other on the base of his neck, he guided him straight into the mat without ever throwing a punch. Maddox hit the floor awkwardly, stunned, more by the humiliation than the fall. Clint didn't even look down at him. He simply turned, walked out of the cage, and sat back in his chair. The crowd went absolutely wild. Commentators screamed into their microphones. Twitter exploded. Every MMA fan who had ever criticized showboating, every old-school fighter who had ever praised mental warfare, they all had just witnessed a masterclass in psychological domination. The vulture had been plucked featherless, and not a single punch was needed. The UFC president called it the most bizarre and unforgettable moment in combat sports history. Reporters tripped over themselves, trying to label what had just occurred. Was it performance art? A symbolic protest? A genius takedown of the modern fight culture? Later that night, Maddox posted a short, sobered video to his fans. I underestimated that man, he said quietly. I thought I was picking a fight with a retired actor. I didn't realize I was walking into a lesson. He paused, then smiled sheepishly. He made me fight myself, and I lost. Clint Eastwood, as expected, said almost nothing afterward. No press tour, no interviews, just a quiet return to his home in Carmel by the Sea, where he resumed working on a small indie film, rumored to be about age, legacy, and the myths we create to hide from ourselves. The fight that wasn't became the subject of podcasts, college lectures, and even a Netflix documentary. Eastwood's appearance wasn't remembered for action, but for presence. The MMA community found itself split. Some criticized the theatrics, others praised the restraint and said it redefined the meaning of strength in the sport. One thing was certain, Travis Maddox was no longer the loudest man in the room. And Clint Eastwood? He didn't need to be. He'd already said everything he needed to, by saying almost nothing at all. The dust had settled, but the ripples kept spreading. What had started as a mockery, a brash MMA fighter calling out an old Hollywood legend, had ended in one of the most iconic and unexpected moments in sports entertainment history. There were no bloodstains in the cage, no medical stoppages, no broken noses or technical knockouts. And yet, what Clint Eastwood delivered that night had more impact than a flurry of punches. In a single 15-minute segment, he deconstructed modern masculinity, silenced arrogance with presence, and exposed a rising star not with violence, but with truth. The sports world was stunned. The media scrambled for language. ESPN aired special coverage titled Clint Eastwood, the Mind Game Master. Articles with headlines like How a 94-year-old Man Just Changed MMA Forever and Forget the Fight. Eastwood won the war of identity exploded across major platforms. Commentators, coaches, athletes, and psychologists all weighed in. Joe Rogan, on his podcast the following day, couldn't stop praising it. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, the guy didn't throw a single punch, And yet he dismantled this dude's soul in front of 20,000 people and millions watching online. That was martial arts in its purest form. Not just physical, but philosophical. But beyond the spectacle, something else happened. Something deeper. Travis the Vulture Maddox disappeared from the public eye for nearly a month. No tweets. No gym selfies. No call-outs. For a man whose social media had been a nonstop parade of flexing, trash talk, and branded content, his silence was deafening. Many assumed he'd taken the L and walked away humiliated. Others speculated he was cooking up a redemption arc. But what the world didn't expect was what actually came next. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Maddox returned, not with bravado, but with a simple 15-minute YouTube video titled, "What Clint Taught Me." It wasn't a flashy edit. There was no music, just Travis, alone in a simple room with no trophies behind him, no gloves, no branding. He looked different, not physically, but in spirit. Still strong, still young, but more grounded. He sat still for a long time before speaking. I used to think being a man meant never backing down, always being loud, never showing weakness, he said, voice steady but soft. I thought calling out Clint Eastwood was funny. Thought I'd get a few headlines, maybe a movie role. But what I got was a mirror I wasn't ready to face. He admitted he'd underestimated Eastwood entirely, not just as a fighter, but as a human being. Clint didn't need to punch me. He didn't need to do anything except be himself. And that was enough to make me question who I was. He talked about watching the footage back, over and over, realizing that his whole identity had been wrapped in noise, in yelling louder, punching harder, talking bigger. But Eastwood, he operated from silence, stillness, precision. He fought with calm, Maddox said, shaking his head with a faint smile. And I've never felt more unprepared in my life. The video was raw, unfiltered, and went viral for entirely different reasons than anything he'd ever posted. People saw a different side of him. Not the cocky fighter, but the humbled man. Comments poured in from both haters and supporters, some admitting they'd written him off, others saying they saw his humanity for the first time. But that wasn't all. Weeks later, Maddox announced he'd be taking a temporary leave from professional fighting. Not because of injury or scandal, but to reevaluate who he was, what kind of fighter he wanted to be, and what it meant to carry strength with responsibility. He began training at a quieter, lesser-known dojo in Japan, learning traditional martial arts and meditation. Pictures leaked of him sweeping dojo floors, helping local students, and training in silence. Not for the cameras, not for sponsors, but for himself. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood stayed completely silent. Not one interview, not one public appearance. The only glimpse of him came from a grainy photo someone took of him walking along a beach near Carmel, hands in his coat pockets, looking out at the ocean. The caption read simply, "The man who said everything without saying anything." But Clint's message had already spread. The world was talking, not just sports fans, but everyone. College professors dissected his confrontation with Maddox in sociology and psychology classes. The phrase Eastwood energy became a trending term used to describe someone who remained calm under pressure, who didn't rise to provocation, who led with presence over performance. Life coaches and therapists started referencing it when talking to clients about self-control and grounded masculinity. A TikTok trend exploded with users filming themselves in tense situations and resolving them with silence, adding the now legendary quote, "You don't need to be hit to feel pain." And then came a most unexpected development of all. Months after the event, the UFC quietly announced a new mentorship initiative called the Eastwood Program. The idea? Pairing retired fighters and veterans with rising stars, not just for physical training, but to pass down wisdom, humility, and psychological resilience. The first mentor invited to shape the curriculum? Clint Eastwood himself. Though he declined a formal role, he offered to record a short video statement. It was played at the program's launch event, a dimly lit theater filled with athletes and coaches. The screen lit up, and there he was, Eastwood, in a dark room, speaking slowly, with that signature gravel in his voice. "Fighting's easy," he began. "You throw a punch, you take a hit. What's hard? is knowing when not to. What's hard is standing still when the world wants you to flinch. If you want to be dangerous, really dangerous, learn to master your silence. Make your peace louder than their noise. And always remember, age doesn't soften you. It reveals what you've been hiding behind youth. The room gave a standing ovation. From that point on, Clint's influence rippled through the world of sports, cinema, and culture in ways that couldn't be measured by trophies or ticket sales. He became a symbol, not of rebellion, not of aggression, but of self-mastery. Maddox, now back in the public eye with a quieter tone and a clearer message, began speaking to young fighters about ego, fear, and humility. He even started a podcast called Fighters and Fathers, where he interviewed athletes about their childhoods, their role models, and what strength meant beyond the ring. The first guest? An old boxing coach from Eastwood's early days who told stories about Clint's obsessive work ethic, his refusal to be anyone other than who he was, and the time he knocked out a speed bag until his knuckles bled. Not for the cameras, but because he wasn't done thinking. In time, people stopped asking, did Clint Eastwood really beat Maddox? And started asking a better question. What kind of man do I want to be when I'm 94? Because that's what Clint gave the world that night, a new image of power. Not the one with fists raised high, screaming in victory, but the one who stands tall in silence, with nothing to prove and everything already earned.